Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. Welcome to From the Field, the New Zealand technical team, talking about lessons we've learned from the field. My name's Trevor Kennedy. I'm a principal solution architect here at Amazon New Zealand, and I'm joined today by Richard. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself, mate?
Hey, Trevor. Nice to chat again, mate. Nice to see face-to-face, given the lockdown situation here in Auckland. My name's Richard Brewer-Singer. I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS in the enterprise team. So I work with some of our larger customers.
You sound like you've got a dodgy accent, mate. It doesn't sound like you've been in New Zealand all your life.
I am one of those global citizens, actually. So, I was born in Africa, grew up in Wellington in New Zealand, did my time over in the UK and the States a bit, and even a little bit of stint in Australia. And now I am back home. So still consider New Zealand home, and it's great to be here, that's for sure.
Good to see you. And you've come back at a great time, of course. Today we just announced some big news.
Yes, great time to be working at AWS. That's a pretty impressive commitment from AWS into New Zealand, and looking forward to seeing what the customers do with it. Should be good.
Yeah, for those that haven't heard, we've announced that we'll be launching a region in New Zealand in 2024. So massive investment from AWS, and exciting times if you're in the tech sector within New Zealand. We're going to be, as part of this from the field, we're going to be doing a lot of sessions about how to enable you to build on AWS, so we can take advantage of that infrastructure once it actually finally hits New Zealand in a couple of years. So really excited for that. Obviously, a big news, particularly for New Zealand AWS.
Yeah, specifically for my customers, and I'm sure yours too, Trevor. They're all going to be excited about this.
Yeah, 100%. I work with a lot of large enterprises. I don't think being in Australia has been a huge barrier, but being able to have it local, have all your data to be residency rules in New Zealand, and have the data protection in New Zealand is kind of a big thing, particularly for government agencies. And look, just having another region within APJ that we can back up to and stand up if something goes wrong, I mean, it brings a lot of comfort to the customers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just removes any kind of blockers, I guess. So if there's anything you need from an on-premise perspective that's kind of got a low latency requirement, it's something going to make those opportunities available to you. So yeah, I think it can only be goodness. We're really looking forward to seeing what happens.
Good stuff. All right, mate. So on to today's topic.
Okay.
What are you going to cover for us today?
Yeah. So look, I thought I had a bit of time, and in the past, I did a bit of work with HashiCorp and Terraform with a bunch of customers, and they got me into a bit of Golang coding. So every now and then I like to flex my fingers and do some coding. So I thought, hey, why don't we point that at one of the problems that I kind of have seen with customers in the past that they've kind of had to tackle, and so I've got a little presentation. We might as well kick into it, I guess, and then we can start kind of going through it. And then, but ultimately, what it is a bit of a my opinionated view on how we may be able to tackle some of these problems we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so great. If you share your screen, I'll add you to the stream there.
Oops, how does that work? Okay, cool. Yeah, I can do that.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, hopefully you have got the front screen.
Got it.
Awesome. Okay, so what I thought about is that typically what happens is, most larger organizations, especially the ones which have got either complex infrastructure or are growing at scale, typically use a bunch of third-party tools. These come from, these can come from our marketplace environment, or they could be kind of our technical partners. And there's a bunch of additional tools that customers typically onboard to help them augment their cloud capability. And what I have seen is, these tools are great. They've got lots of capability. There's lots of sort of features built into these tools, and customers, typically buy them for specific business reasons to try and tick off certain things they're having pain with, or that they want to add additional functionality for. And sometimes there can be some challenges with integrating all these tools, and we'll talk a bit about that when we look at the challenges. And so I thought, hey, look, just for the fun of it, let me take a look at something that I've seen a couple of times now is, how to integrate a product like, say, Cloudability using a infrastructure as code tool like Terraform. And we can get into that in a bit.
Okay, so you're using Cloudability as an example, but realistically, this is for any third-party tool. You could take this approach. Am I right there?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm thinking holistically about the fact that there are a lot of integrations typically, and maybe we can start with this agenda here. What is this talk? Who is this talk kind of aimed at? Again, it's aimed at complex organizations that kind of have. Again, it's not necessarily limited to them, but they've typically got more challenges in this area. They've got maybe some slightly siloed teams that run these kind of tools on their own. And the challenges here. So what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the challenges. We'll take a look at an example that I kind of hacked together in my spare time around Cloudability and Terraform. We'll talk a little bit about how that solution works, and then maybe we can even look at a little bit of a demo, and then we'll have some closing thoughts.
Sounds good. You're a brave man demoing it live. You have my respect.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Always the demo gods may be with me, may not.
Good stuff.
So this is what integrations typically look like in a large organization, right? You end up with the cloud provider, such as ourselves, AWS. It's kind of run as a platform product, and then what you end up seeing is a bunch of third-party tools are brought alongside to help sort of tick off some specific business requirements or technical requirements. And these could be things like security tools, like cloud conformity, or maybe application performance monitoring tools like New Relic or App Dynamics, or you get FinOps tools like Cloudability or Cloud Health. And there's a plethora of things. I mean, in fact, there's way more than I can possibly talk about. But essentially, what you see is a bunch of integrations alongside the cloud provider. And so, what are the challenges with this, right? What are the challenges that tend to come up with having these different tools outside of the cloud? So what I have seen is that sometimes you'll get different teams own the tools, and so you might have the cloud platform team might own a security patching tool. The security team might own a vulnerability sort of threat analysis tool. The financial side of the business might own a tool for doing financial management. And what can happen is these things have a life cycle of their own, and they tend to get managed separately. And it's not that easy to sometimes get a clear view across all those tools, a consistent view across your entire cloud. And sometimes this can lead to, hey, the security tool is telling me that we've got a bunch of vulnerabilities, but when I look over here, they're actually all green and there's nothing to do. And so there could be maybe a lag in the data sync, or the configuration might not be quite correct across all these different tools. And so what it can lead to is potentially sort of a inability to trust the data coming from these tools. The other thing that's worth noting is, typically these tools get installed into a customer's environment, and in the beginning, everything works well, right? Because, it's using vanilla config plus a little bit, and it's fairly easy to understand. You can, it's got like maybe, I don't know, configuration, and it says, hey, look at my entire AWS estate, and we're good. And then, a few months down the line, and, it's reporting everything correctly, everything's great. And a few months down the line, there's a bit of an issue, and someone says, oh, we need to exclude these items from being monitored now because of, Project B is doing something special, and we don't want to be sort of covered by this. We're going to do something new. So you have to add someone goes in there and adds like an if statement, or something even more complex, maybe some scripting, or does something a little bit more difficult. And over time, this leads to a little bit of a nightmare to manage. And what it can lead to is a fear to change anything, because there's a huge amount of configs in there. There's a lot of if statements, and maybe there's a bunch of magic variables that are doing a lot of things, and it can be difficult to kind of say, okay, well, now we need to make this change, and we're uncertain as to what the outcome might be, and we may not know for a couple of days whether we've got a problem or not. And I think I've seen this a few times now, and I think it's really because there's no these tools provide a lot of functionality, and it's up to the customer how they want to implement it. And there's no standard way to say, here's the product, integrate with this way, and you'll get all the features you need. There's kind of going to be some flexibility in there. Am I painting the picture right there?
Yeah. So the problem there, what you're stating is, when you first set it up with these external tools, the connection to or the integration with these external tools, everything's fine, everything's in sync, everything's working. But further down the line, as you're adding stuff and making changes within AWS, you're going out of sync with the external tool, and therefore it's not showing. You can't trust the information. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, that's one option. Or the second option is, let's say these organizations change a lot, right? So they may merge with another organization tomorrow, and suddenly they've got a whole nother AWS environment to look at. And this may not be configured in the tool. And so what happens is some stuff is now showing up and some stuff is not. And So there's got to be a repeatable, or, well, maybe not a repeatable, but there's got to be a way to try and bring those new environments into scope of the tool now, for example. And similarly, the cloud changes. The landscape changes very quickly these days, especially in complex organizations where things don't look the same. It's not necessarily lots of everything that looks the same. It's lots of everything is slightly different. And because of that, there may be, some quirks to this config, which is difficult to manage. Maybe once we get a bit further, hopefully it'll become clear. Hopefully it haven't lost you along the way yet.
No, you're good.
Cool. So what I thought I'd do is, we just want to call out here. We're definitely not picking on Cloudability. I really like Cloudability. I think the product is very good at what it does. It offers a lot of functionality to the customers, and they've also got a really extensive, well-documented API that allows tooling to be written and customizations to be built. So it's, for me, it's one of those key must-haves in any product you're putting into the ecosystem is the ability to do some automation around the configuration. So, cool. But what I'm really showcasing here is one option of how it could be easy to integrate Cloudability into an AWS environment.
So you picked them because their API documentation is good, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's well documented. I've seen Cloudability grow over the years, and so things have, obviously they've added more functionality and more features, but the API has always stayed well documented, easy to understand. Their support is really good. If you need help, they can jump on and jump into it and get into it with you. So just from it feels like a company that is API first. There's a lot of examples out there, and they've got quite a good community as well behind their development. So it's pretty good.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like a good choice to demonstrate your approach.
Absolutely. So what I thought I'd do is I'd take a look at Cloudability and see, hey, look, what are the common sort of scenarios and best practices for integrating Cloudability? And again, this is just a really, quick look at this. It's not an in-depth. It's not going to answer everyone's use cases, but this is a pretty reasonable approach, I think. So I thought, hey, let's look at the different types of kind of use cases and best practices we have. One of them is that in Cloudability, you can create views, and views allow you to slice your. So what Cloudability does is ingests a lot of cost usage data from AWS, and using views allows you to slice through that cost data in dimensions that the customer decides. So for example, it could be a cost center, it might be a region, it could be lots of different things. And it's up to the customer again, how they want to slice it. There's lots of different ways that can be done. And I just thought, hey, just as a use case, we'll do sort of a view by cost center and possibly by cloud provider if you're in an environment that uses more than one. And what are some of the other things that we have to do is there's a bunch of IAM roles that are used to connect Cloudability to AWS, and this typically in most large organizations is going to happen at the payer account. And the payer account, it's one of the crown jewels in the AWS cabinet, I suppose. You've got a crown jewels in there. That's one of the ones which is quite important in your estate and is managed a bit more tightly than the rest of your environment, most likely. So making changes in this environment can be a little bit more risky, and so managing it in some way is something that I think is useful. And finally, just the ability to use something to do CI/CD or traceability and auditing, something in that area makes sense to me because we're talking about config. Why would it not be stored somewhere, and why would it not be run through GitOps or CI/CD?
Yeah, if you can add it to your pipeline, that's just going to save that manual processing, right? Then someone's going to forget a manual task at some stage. So if you've got a strong pipeline around it, you're good to go, yeah?
Absolutely. And again, I also try to think about the the operations lifecycle for these things. So, I kind of thought some of these are regular items and they kind of happen all the time. So, for example, you change a cost center or you add a cost center. That feels like something that would probably happen, I don't know, daily or weekly or something, fairly regularly, and it probably doesn't need too much scrutiny because it's a fairly well understood change that's going to happen fairly often. And I think there might be some other things, like, for example, changing the payer account config might be something that you want to review and someone might need to authorize before allowing those changes to occur. So again, when we get to the demo, hopefully all that works smoothly and we can get a feel for some which are automated and some which are kind of going to require manual review. And so again, I just wanted to kind of highlight, this is kind of the typical operations, like the architecture operations model, I suppose, at a high level for tools that are kind of installed into the environment. You end up with, you've got AWS sitting over on its own, essentially. You've got a third-party product like Cloudability, and the users and admin are kind of configured separately. The admin pushes config into Cloudability. Cloudability produces reports and they kind of come out for consumption in this kind of model. And this is probably fairly typical for most use cases, I think.
So what you end up here then is you have different administrators in Cloudability, different administrators in AWS, and different administrators in your AD or your directory service, whatever it might be. Is that
correct? Yeah.
The risk? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly common, because like I said, the tools are normally purchased for a specific business need, and then they don't all follow the same pattern. So the admins would be separate. I think that's probably a fair call. But I guess the point here is that they run fairly separately. So what I am suggesting is, with some level of integration and automation, is it looks a bit more like this. So what happens is, you end up with Cloudability augmenting your AWS environment, and admins are involved in important changes. So there's an integration step here that's happening in this area here, and this is automated or semi-automated with approvals, and all of this essentially is happening here, and the users are now consuming these reports, and it feels like a cohesive system with we're working with one platform, not two products with different UIs, so to speak.
Okay, so if you removed a user out of your directory group, they would automatically be removed out of the Cloudability. That's essentially.
Yeah, so we'll get a chance to see that in a second. So actually, let's move on and we'll talk about. So actually, yeah, I think one of the other things around the admin model for Cloudability is there's sort of two types of roles. There's administrators and there's users. They have another sort of mechanism for granulating permissions using views, and that's a very powerful product, a very powerful tool that allows you to slice. Again, we talked about views before. You can slice your view on the cloud based on your what you care about. So if you care about, I don't know, EC2 instances, you can get a slice that just shows you EC2 instances and nothing else. So they've got capability in that space, but managing the users and the admin groups, I would suggest it should probably be synced with something like a directory, and using a tool like what I'm suggesting, you could probably do that quite straightforward. And I'll show you that in a bit.
Cool.
Okay, so what did I actually do? All right, so because I wanted to play around with Terraform, Golang, and sort of do a bit of, I don't know, what's the word? Knee-deep messing around in the muck. I basically decided to build a Cloudability provider for Terraform. And so what I've done here is I built, the first thing I had to do was go out and build a SDK for Go to allow Cloudability, to leverage Cloudability APIs via Golang. So that's the first component here. And we'll take a look at this in a minute. I'll show you the source. All the sources on GitHub, it's open. It's under the Apache license agreement, so anyone can have a go. So then there's the Terraform provider for Cloudability, which is basically the actual plugin for Terraform that manages the resources within Cloudability. and that leverages the SDK. And finally, what I built is a bunch of sample modules that showcase, how can you use these modules to manage your environment. And again, they're available on GitHub, but I also sort of install them in Terraform Cloud, so we can have a look at them a bit later and see how they might be used for managing your environment.
Okay.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the stuff that I got into. How best to show this? That might not be the best way. Let's go here. So basically, let me first of all show you the GitHub repository. My user ID on GitHub is Skyscraper without an E there, a bit millennial name. So basically, these are the repos that I'm currently publishing for this type of for this particular piece of work. So I've got the Terraform Cloud provider for Cloudability, the Cloudability modules, and the SDK, and there's a bit of work here that I'm working on something else there. Again, this is open. Anyone can go here. If anyone wants access to these, they can either find it by Googling, or the other thing is that the Cloudability module, the Terraform provider, is registered in the Terraform registry. So you can, if you wanted to, to actually use this, you can reference it directly out of the Terraform registry. You don't have to do any, and it will be installed on the fly as required. So Terraform, in the modules, just talk about these real briefly. So I kind of thought about what are the common use cases, and so these are modules that are linked to those. There's one to manage the payer account, one to manage each individual linked account. So every time you deploy an account, this is the Terraform module you would use to manage that deployed account. This is business mappings one we'll talk about in a bit. This is where you can map your cost centers and sort of other business logic to try and slice up and dice up your cost view. And this is probably the bit that I'm interested in seeing what people think about managing it this way, because this is probably the most difficult thing to manage over time, because this is the thing that grows and gets complicated, and is kind of hard to manage as time goes on. Okay, so what does it actually look like? So again, I installed these modules into Terraform Cloud just so we could have a quick look. And so you can see here, for example, I'm doing business mappings, linked account, and master account. And the business mappings, this is the views we're talking about. And we'll take a look at this in Cloudability in a minute. Hopefully it'll become a bit clearer. The business mappings are configured to automatically run changes based on Git commits. So if I send a new change to the Git repository, this workflow should pick up and run and deploy it to Cloudability. And we'll see that in a second. The master account, though, I'm going to do a change to a policy in the master account, and we'll see that one needs a review and acceptance before we allow that change to happen in the payer account. But again, hopefully it's fairly clear once we get going. Any questions, Trevor? Is that fairly clear what's going on here?
Yeah, no, looks good. I'm keen to see what code you've done. I'm assuming this code's going to be reusable for. I could take the same sort of structure and reuse it for other tools, right? This is going to give me a bit of a head start. Would that be a fair comment, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some. I mean, some. By the way, there's the from a Terraform provider perspective, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of providers. So depending on the tool, there may already be one available. I wrote this one specifically sort of as a learning exercise, I guess. So it's not particularly, there's a lot of scaffolding and boilerplate code available through the HashiCorp documentation. It's pretty straightforward to build if, as long as you're willing to put the effort in to, set up the environments and go through the testing. Probably the hardest thing to do is get through acceptance testing to get your provider listed on the HashiCorp registry. But once you've done that once or twice, it's relatively straightforward. Cool. Okay, so this is the Cloudability dashboard, and it's just showing a bunch of random data here. And I just wanted to show you some bits and pieces here. So this is because we've only got Amazon instances in here. This is all sort of Amazon spend here, AWS. And so what you can see here is under this organize section is we have a bunch of things that we care about. Tags will be an interesting one. So I think it's going to take a little while to refresh. Tags is an interesting one. So I've added just an example tag of cost center. So this is one that I care about and I want to see in my slicing. And the way it works, that at least the way that I've implemented this, is there's a cost center tag, and I've created what they call a business mapping, which basically says what is a valid cost center. So I've got cost center 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 9. And what this does essentially is then there's a matching view which allows you to see your data based on cost center. So for example, you can see in here that I can switch between views, and I mean, there may not be any data in cost center 2. I doubt there is because I haven't applied any, but you get the point. Basically, you can switch your view between cost centers, and when you're on the dashboard, you get your slice of cost center 2 only.
So practically, if you were doing this in AWS, for example, it would take the tags out of AWS and then map them against these cost centers. Is that effectively how it works?
Correct. And it doesn't have to be just the tag. It can be other. You can, I don't know, do it by account, or you can do it. So you can slice and dice it how you like. I'm just doing it by tag as a simple example for demo purposes. But typically these things get pretty complicated, and it could be, I want to see these 6 accounts tagged with cost center plus this other account which doesn't need any tags. I just want the whole bill. And so you can kind of end up in those scenarios quite quickly, which is fine. That's a perfectly acceptable use of these rules.
Yeah, it's certainly, we always encourage our customers to use at least a tagging policy to make sure that when they are using external tools, it's easier, right? But then to your point, the problem then is if you add a new tag, how do we know that it's now showing up in Cloudability or
absolutely
what other tool that they might be using? So yeah, this looks
Thank
good.
you. That leads me nicely onto a demo. So just 1 second. I might just briefly stop sharing, just 1 second, and then I'll just make sure that my environment looks good to go. What about you, Trevor? Are you a coder of any type? Or
Mate, it's been years since I've done coding. I did create a couple of open source tools back in the day. One of them was I was doing threat research at Trend Micro, and I created a tool that plugged into VirusTotal. And for those that are not familiar with VirusTotal, it allows you to basically take any file, upload it to the VirusTotal website, and it will check whether any of the AV vendors across the globe thinks it's a virus. So I created an open source desktop app in C# back in the day. Very, very popular amongst the threat research community. So got quite a few users, quite a few power users. But to be honest, mate, I've not had to program in years. I'm trying to get back up to speed with Python, but yeah, it's been a bit slow.
No problem. It's not for everyone, but it sounds like you were there. All right, so here's an example. So this is my my IDE. I'm using an IDE. It could be anything. It's basically a text file for Terraform. So this is actually the definition of cost centers that I'm using. As you can see here, it goes 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and there's also a matching view for every cost center. So there's a view for all the cost centers as well. So just as an example, I'm going to add one, or maybe delete one. This would be an easier option. Let's do a delete. I'm gonna remove number 9, and so what we'll actually, before we do that, let's quickly go have a look at Cloudability, and we'll see on the business mapping side. Inside the cost center section, we have 9 cost centers being tagged, and we have 9 views or cost center. And I'm going to commit that change. Okay, so pushing that code to my Git repository, and what we should see is almost immediately this will pick up. There we go. So it's picking up that change in Git. It's queued up a plan, and this particular oops, I need to get to the run section. So remove cost center 9 is now in planning phase. It's applying, and what this is doing essentially is it's set up to auto apply, meaning I don't have to wait for anything. It's just going to go do it. And you can see that it's destroyed one thing was changed. And if we go over to Cloudability, switch over to business mappings again, we can see now that cost center 9 is gone and the views are updated as well. Well, they should be. Need to refresh that, I think. Let's try that. Ooh, maybe I'm guessing that takes a little while to update. Or I deleted the wrong thing from the config, one of the two. Here we go, it's gone. So that's just a way to manage the cost centers. So, you know, essentially if you had a really and the idea behind this is if you wanted to pause it to see what was going to happen, then we can. So let's make a change now to the master account, the payer account. So are you following this, Trevor? Is it all clear?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, great.
I'm just surprised that it worked, mate. We're starting.
Fair enough. So let's change. What should we change? Let's change some details of this IAM role because so yeah, I'll probably just change that IAM role. I think that should be good. Just a quick diff, make sure. So yep, I added one line to the policy there basically because they made Cloudability made an update. They updated the policy, and then I've added one line to it. So let's do a git commit. Okay, and we'll push that. And hopefully we should see, for example, this one will be what's the master account ticks over. Come on. Here we go. And so what will happen here is, oh, by the way, you can see that actually it triggered a plan on the other workspace. It'll be interesting because there won't be any changes. So that one will do nothing. But this one here will be is queuing this plan up. Let's have a quick look. Oop, go to the runs.
So run me through the planning status again. What's?
Yeah, so what happens with the planning is Terraform is doing what it does is it does a synchronize with your environment, and then it looks at all the resources that are under management. And in this case, we're managing an IAM policy for Cloudability. And so what's happened is when I make a change to that policy, it's noticing the drift or the change, and it's saying, hey, we need to update the policy. And in this case, it's going to say, hey, I want you to approve this change before you run it. So you can see the difference. You can say, hey, do I want to do this? Do I not? And then maybe this is where I think an admin would probably be, or someone who's, so you can see that it says one planned. There's a planned change here.
Gotcha, yeah.
And so if we look at this, it will say, you can see that it's changing this particular item. And what it's doing is, it's a little bit unclear here, but what it's doing really is adding this one line. So it's modifying this policy and changing this statement, essentially. So you can see that it's plus, 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 plus. I'm adding all this and I'm removing all of that.
Yep. So at the moment, it hasn't applied it. It's essentially queued it for approval before it applies, yeah? Gotcha, okay.
Correct. And so it's got the confirmation here, and this is all, it's got role access-based control around it. So the person that pushes to get may not have rights to confirm this. So it's a bit of a belt and braces if you're going to, and for example, you could see, you're about to delete an S3 bucket. That doesn't look like a good idea. We need to investigate that further. Or, hey, this is changing more than we expected. But hey, right now, all we're trying to do is add this one line to this policy. This looks good to me. Pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and make the change.
So this is essentially Terraform adding in that step, yeah, of approvals.
Yeah, this is Terraform Cloud, which is this product here, is doing that for us. Yeah. This is free. I mean, I think you get a limited use for free, and then Terraform Enterprise would be the all singing, all dancing version. But a lot of customers are using this, and I'm just decided to have a play. And there you go. That's finished there. So what we'll now see is that policy has been updated in the account, and we're all ready to go now with whatever's going on with our cost management. So I think just a quick recap, I suppose. Why do they call it FinOps at scale? Because the configuration is actually the bit that makes the output of this data, the output of these reports, have value, really. So it's the faster you can get those configuration changes into your environment and keep everything up to date, the more, relevant the reporting is that you're seeing out of the tool. So the actual ins and outs of driving Cloudability and sort of doing all the stuff that's in here is not really the thing that I'm looking at. I'm looking at, how do I maintain configuration of this tool at scale so that as you add more and more things into your environment and you've got moving parts all over the place, that your third-party tools stay in step with your cloud environment. So that's what I'm looking at here.
So this essentially allows you to make it part of your pipeline, right? So a lot of this stuff you can say, right, I don't need to make sure that every month someone manually goes and does this, or every day someone manually goes and does this. You just add it to your pipeline, schedule it, completely automate it via code, and you just know that it's going to stay in sync continuously, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's, and again, just to highlight the sample modules that I've created. There's one around user sync. So this is where you could take a group from AD and say, here's my users and here's my admins, and sync them into the Cloudability user list. So that way, as people leave your organization or they enter the organization, they automatically get provisioned or deprovisioned. I think that's quite a useful capability to have here. The second one is managing the master account, as we've done just now. The third one is sort of how to onboard every single account that you have into Cloudability as a child linked account from the payer. And then the business mappings is the configuration for the slicing and dicing. And this IAM role is actually shared between all of these things. So that's kind of the use cases I looked at and the products that I created. So, and by the way, I'd be interested to see. So there's been a few users that have used it recently, and there's a few issues that have been raised and closed. And so if anyone wanted to have a go, they're more than welcome to if they wanted to try it or use it. feel free to reach out. I'm happy to have a call or have a session to help them get through it.
Yeah, it sounds like a cool tool, mate. One of the stories I have is back in the day, just as cloud was taking off, I was working for a large satellite company in the UK, doing a bit of contracting with them. After the contract ended, it was about a 3-month engagement. They disabled all my access to their internal environment. However, I still had access to a couple of their cloud tools where it just didn't sync, right? And I think that's part of the problem here is with all these third-party tools that are out there that are plugging into your cloud and plugging into maybe your directory service on your internal network. If you don't keep them in sync, then it becomes a massive security hole, right? So anything that helps with along those lines is definitely going to be a win.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, 100%. I think we've all been there. We've all been there where the onboarding, or well, actually, it's not so much the onboarding process; it's the offboarding process, which has usually got some holes in it. And I think we've all seen that happen at some point in the past. Companies are definitely getting better at that these days, but this could help, obviously.
Yeah, and also then your other use case was the syncing of the tags or whatever mechanism you're using for your internal billing to be able to sync that and make sure that's always there as well. Again, a big win. It's one of our pillars is making sure that we look at cost optimization, the best way to ensure we're looking at the costs. If it's never synced and no one ever gets billed it, all of a sudden there's an orphaned EC2 instance there running in the background, getting hundreds of dollars a month of charges, and no one's getting internally billed to it. And no one wants to switch it off because they don't know. Oh, if I switch this off, is this going to break my core banking or whatever it might be? So people are always reluctant, right, to switch these things off if you haven't got them syncing.
Absolutely, and this is over time things get worse and worse, right? You start off and you think I can keep a handle on that initially. And as time goes on, it gets pretty difficult to manage. I mean, it's an interesting game. I think then you've got to multiply this out by the amount of tools you've got. So this is and one tool you may have I don't know. Most organizations that are larger probably have I don't know in the order of 5 or 6 at least. So I'm not suggesting all of them need the same level of automation integration. But hey, why not? The more it's automated and integrated, the more you're going to trust your environment and all the tools are going to be working for you. The worst case scenario is where, users lose a bit of trust in the tool, maybe, and through no fault of the tool. And then there's not much usage, and you're paying for something you don't need. That's not what we want to see.
Yeah. Classic example of that is the internal CMDB, right? Where everybody's like, oh yeah, it's in the CMDB, but no one trusts the CMDB because it's always out of date, it's always out of sync. It's just a classic example, right?
Very, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good stuff.
What else do you want to? So actually, I guess we should probably finish up. Let me quickly wrap up on a couple of items. So I was thinking about, what's the repeatable pattern look like? The repeatable pattern is, identify the use cases and best practices. And I think, identifying tools as well that can help you do this, meaning tools that are API first and have good documentation and automation available to them. I think most of the tools these days do, but it's probably, for me, as an entry point into your ecosystem should be they can sort of handle this sort of scenario. Try to define and configure as code as much as possible, leverage GitOps or CI/CD tools to drive those changes rather than, driving the console. We used to have a saying at one of the startups I worked at a while back, which is every time someone opens a console, a data center engineer dies. So, the less time you can spend sort of configuring the console is probably a good thing. Just using it for the business benefits you're meant to be getting out of it is awesome. And finally, try to look at it as a whole ecosystem rather than a bunch of tools. I think that's also quite important. Is that these things extend the cloud for you. They extend the capability of AWS with some additional capability, and you want all that to be as seamless as possible.
Yeah, and just on what do we need to make this work? Obviously, on the AWS side, we have APIs, so they're pretty well documented. But we essentially need that on the third-party tool side as well, right? They need to have a decent API, needs to be well documented.
100%. Yeah, I would say, like I said before, I think that's, for me, that's becoming, core entry criteria is that there's good support for this. But I think, again, most of the tools we work with these days have got that capability. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, listen, mate, I really appreciate you taking us through this. It sounds like it's it's good practice that everybody should be applying. Anytime we can automate it, anytime we can make it part of CI/CD, that's got to be a win. And you've given us a really good example there using Cloudability. To all of our watchers and listeners, we do have a New Zealand technical community LinkedIn group. I've got it on the screen there. Do join that LinkedIn group. Richard's a member of it. So if you have any follow-up questions and you want to reach out, he's available in that LinkedIn group. He's obviously also published his Git repository there as well, and you'll be able to follow up and go from there. Any final statements there, Rich?
No, thanks, Trevor. It's been fun, actually. Looking forward to the next one. So, and hopefully we get a chance to chat a little bit about that New Zealand region sometime.
Indeed, yeah. I think we might need to get the leadership on one of these sessions, mate, to see if we've got some questions from the community, but particularly as we get closer to the launch date. That's definitely something we should look at.
All right, time to go and get dinner. I think it's a bit late over here. Hope everyone else has had some.
Excellent. Well, listen, mate, really appreciate you being part of the show today. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Trevor. Take it easy.